The bullet hit Sergeant Daniels square in the chest before anyone heard the gunshot. He stumbled back against the wet rocks, eyes filled with disbelief, red staining his vest like wine spreading across cloth. Lieutenant Lydia Carter saw him go down and knew right away they'd stepped into a trap hidden among the trees. Enemy in the canopy, multiple shooters. Staff Sergeant Brooks tried to warn them, but a second bullet cut him off, smashing through his helmet like a steel hammer. He collapsed instantly, gone before hitting the leaf-covered ground. Then everything erupted. Bullets ripped through branches, tore bark apart, sent wood chips flying like tiny missiles. The SEAL team dove for safety, hiding behind trees too narrow and holes too small, grabbing any cover that might stop the rounds coming from every direction at once. They've got us surrounded from above. Lydia flattened herself against a huge pine tree, hearing bullets slam into everything around her. 10 shooting spots, possibly more. Enemy marksmen hidden in the forest like phantoms, invisible up high, taking out her team with perfect accuracy while her teammates fell among the plants. Then she thought about the gun case on her back, the case she'd carried for half a year without ever opening, the one she promised herself she'd never need again. Her fingers reached for the straps before she even decided to do it. What unfolded over the next 23 minutes would change a disaster into a story people would never forget. How one soldier went from watching to becoming the deadliest hunter these woods had ever known. How she tracked the trackers through land that should have made it impossible. But before we reveal how she pulled it off, leave a comment saying where you're from and hit that subscribe button, because this tale will flip everything you believe about real fighters. Now let's dive in. The assignment had begun 2 days before at a mountain base, surrounded by thick forest stretching for miles. Captain Jake Morrison brought his SEAL team into the planning tent, a cloth building, smelling of weapon cleaner and black coffee, walls plastered with maps and aerial photos. "Listen up," Morrison said, pointing at a marked circle on the chart. "We're heading to a weapons storage site, about 12 kilometers into the woods. Our information says they're keeping anti-aircraft rockets there that have been downing our helicopter. We confirm the weapons, call in the bombing run, and leave. Straightforward. When has anything been simple in these woods?" Petty Officer Martinez grumbled, studying the landscape with the tiredness of someone who'd learned through 3 deployments that forests could be just as deadly as firefights. "Since we have solid intelligence and they won't expect us," Morrison answered. "They have no idea we're coming. We move quickly, stay silent, finish the job before they realize we're nearby." That's when Lieutenant Lydia Carter entered the tent, and everyone looked up. She appeared exactly like her paperwork described, an intelligence specialist attached for field work, mid-fit body hidden under loose tactical clothes. Black hair tied back practically. She held a tablet and a rifle case, the standard gear of support staff trying to look tactical. "This is Lieutenant Carter," Morrison said. "She's coming along to review our intelligence collection methods in woodland settings. She stays back with communications, watches, writes her reports." "Understood." A chorus of agreement filled the tent, though several SEALs swapped looks that clearly meant great, another office worker to protect. None of them knew, none were cleared to know, that Lydia Carter's personnel file had more secret sections than readable parts. That she'd worked 4 years with a group that officially didn't exist, running missions in forests and jungles on 3 continents. That her real job title had been Specialized Operator for Restricted Zone Missions, which was military code for someone who goes where we can't admit and does what we can't acknowledge. That she'd been among the most effective woodland combat experts the US military ever trained, with 38 confirmed kills in places just like this before she left that world and tried becoming something different, someone else. The group departed at 3 in the morning. 12 SEALs plus Carter, vanishing into the forest under darkness. The trees absorbed them right away, giant pines and oaks centuries old, their upper branches so thick they blocked the stars, cutting visibility to whatever their night vision showed. They traveled in combat formation, Martinez up front with his advanced optics, Morrison directing from mid. Carter at the back with the radio operator, skilled, silent, smooth. The woods were full of noise, wind through leaves, far-off animal sounds, the occasional snap of wood, but nothing suggesting people nearby. For 6 hours straight, everything happened as planned. They moved fast, avoided paths where they might be seen, used GPS through terrain, trying to mess with their direction sense. By daybreak, they'd traveled 8 kilometers into the forest without problems. "Too smooth," Martinez whispered over the radio. "Something feels stay sharp," Morrison replied. "We're 2 hours from the target area." That's when the forest shifted. The bird songs stopped. The normal background sounds faded to creepy silence. Every SEAL sensed it, that ancient warning prey feels when hunters are close. Martinez raised his fist, signaling stop. The team froze, weapons up, eyes sweeping the canopy where morning light came through leaves and beams that made more shadows than brightness. Movement, Martinez whispered. High up, 11 o'clock, maybe 50 meters. The round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him down into the soggy leaves. Before anyone could respond, the next shot killed Brooks. The third injured Daniels. The fourth got their communications guy. The attack was flawless. Enemy shooters had been waiting in high spots throughout the canopy, using the forest itself as cover, shooting from platforms built into huge trees that gave them both height and hiding. The SEALs scattered for protection, but protection was relative in woods where bullets came from overhead. In the canopy, they're up in the trees, Morrison yelled, pressing against an oak that immediately started taking fire. I count at least 6 spots, maybe more. Lydia dove behind a dead log, her analyst mind already mapping shooter locations by sound and where bullets hit. Northwest ridge, 40 meters high. Southeast group, several guns. West side, 1 accuracy shooter. East path, coordinated team. They weren't just skilled, they were professional, controlled, using woodland combat methods that took years to learn. Methods she'd once taught Allied soldiers in 3 different nations before she walked away from that existence. We're stuck, Petty Officer Chen yelled out. Can't get clear shots. They're too high up and too well hidden. Morrison tried organizing return fire, but every time someone exposed themselves to shoot upward, several enemy positions attacked together. The forest ceiling was ideal for this. Dense enough to conceal shooters, open enough for them to have perfect downward shots, making a 3-dimensional trap that regular tactics couldn't beat. Air backup, Morrison commanded. Get me air support right now. Radios destroyed, sir. Someone screamed. They took out communications with their first shot. That's when Lydia made her choice. She'd kept that rifle case for half a year sealed, tried convincing herself she was finished being what she once was. But watching SEALs die in a forest trap, she knew better than anyone. She understood some abilities you can't abandon, not when decent people need them. Her hands went to the case on her back, old habits taking control. The locks clicked open with familiar sound. Inside sat a customized Remington MSR in .338, Lapua Magnum, built for forest work with a silencer made to scatter sound through trees. The weapon had been her partner through 4 years of missions in places exactly like this. She put it together with practiced speed, stock barrel, scope, magazine, movements so fluid they looked rehearsed. Around her, SEALs were dying, or bleeding, or frantically trying shooting back at enemies they couldn't locate. Carter, what are you doing? Morrison shouted from his tree. Get down. She ignored him. Instead, she moved. The SEALs watched confused as the intelligence worker they'd been guarding suddenly changed into something completely different. She glided through the forest like she was born there, reading ground with reflexes beyond any training. Each step landed on firm earth, making zero noise. Each motion used trees and darkness for concealment. Each spot she picked gave her shooting angles that shouldn't exist. She located a place behind moss-covered boulders, offering a thin sightline up through the canopy. Through her scope, the forest separated into levels. Ground floor where her teammates died, middle canopy where branches made false shapes, upper canopy where enemy shooters thought they were safe. She spotted the first one right away, 40 meters up in a massive pine, hidden so perfectly most people would miss him completely. But Lydia had spent 4 years learning to spot what Forrest tried concealing. She saw the unnatural balance of his hidden spot, the tiny shift as he adjusted weight, the gun barrel making a line that didn't fit nature's disorder. She figured the shot in moments, distance 42 meters, upward angle 63 degrees, wind almost nothing under the canopy, target barely moving. She steadied her breathing, dropped her heart rate to 55 beats per minute, and pressed the trigger. The silenced weapon made a sound like a thick branch snapping. The enemy shooter dropped from his spot, tumbling through branches dead before reaching ground. What the? Chen started saying. But Carter was already relocated. She shifted 15 meters to fresh cover, found her next mark, a gunman in an oak, to the southeast drawing aim on Morrison. 2 rounds. First hit his chest. Second made certain. He fell, his weapon clattering down through branches. Carter's fighting back, Martinez shouted, holding a bandage to his injured shoulder. Holy crap, she's actually fighting back. Morrison watched through his scope as the analyst who wasn't an analyst flowed through the forest like a spirit. She didn't battle the terrain, she partnered with it. Every tree giving her cover, every shadow hiding her movement, every angle providing shots at targets she shouldn't see. This wasn't chance. This was skill going way beyond anything basic training offered. The third enemy shooter made the error of trying to move. He crept along a branch seeking a better angle on the SEALs below, and Carter caught the motion. Her bullet found him mid-step, and he plummeted 40 feet through the canopy. She's hunting them. Daniels whispered, observing Carter work. She's legitimately hunting them, like they're animals, and she's the hunter. The fourth and fifth shooters sat together, using teamwork to watch each other's weak spots. Professional setup. Carter shot the observer first. Always take out the observer. Force the shooter to decide alone. Then she waited with Hunter's patience for the gunman to break cover, checking on his teammate. When he did, her bullet was already flying. Morrison keyed his radio. Carter, what exactly are you? Her voice returned steady. Professional, someone who understands these woods better than they do. Keep covered. I'm going to circle around the western spots. Circle around. How will you? But she was already on the move. And what Morrison witnessed challenged everything he thought he understood about forest fighting. Not the clumsy, loud climbing of someone scared of heights, but the smooth, assured movement of someone who'd logged hundreds of hours in forest canopies. She scaled a giant pine like she had climbing gear on her hands and feet, using branches appearing too fragile to hold her weight, but somehow did. Within 2 minutes, she was 30 meters high, traveling through the canopy like it was flat ground. The seals below could hardly follow her progress, just flashes of tactical gear appearing between leaves, the occasional sound of a branch bending under her weight. She discovered the Western sniper crew's position and immediately grasped why they'd been so deadly. 3 shooters in a cluster of oaks using overlapping shooting zones that covered every ground approach. They'd constructed a platform between trees, giving them stability and hiding. Professional setup. But they'd made one error. They were scanning the ground, not the canopy behind them. Carter moved until she was level with their spot 20 meters away, concealed behind pine needles and branches. Through her scope, she saw them perfectly. One watching through field glasses, one searching with his rifle, one getting ready to shift position. They talked quietly to each other in a language she knew but wouldn't mention. She understood. She took the leader first, one silenced round. He slumped over his platform. His teammates reacted with trained speed, turning to locate the danger, but they were looking the wrong way. Carter had already shifted 5 meters along a sturdy branch, finding fresh angle. Second shot, second shooter down. The third one finally saw her. She watched his eyes widen as he realized the hunter had been hunted. He tried swinging his rifle around, but he was too late. Carter's bullet reached him before he could fire. 3 more enemy shooters eliminated. The forest was transforming from death trap to hunting preserve, and the prey wasn't the seals anymore. Jesus Christ, Martinez breathed, watching Carter climb down from the canopy with the same smooth grace she'd shown going up. That's not regular. That's not even close to regular. Morrison had to admit it. He'd served with Marine marksmen, Army Rangers, Delta Force specialists. He'd never witnessed anything like what he was seeing now. Carter traveled through the forest like she belonged there. Like the trees themselves were assisting her, revealing where to go and where to aim. The surviving enemy shooters were getting panicked. Carter could read it in their actions, quicker movements, less control, shots fired without proper targeting. Fear was moving through their group as they grasped they were being systematically hunted by someone superior. The 7th shooter tried escaping, descending from his spot to relocate to ground level. Carter caught him halfway down, visible on the tree trunk with no protection. One shot. The 8th and 9th attempted synchronized fire, both hitting her last known spot together, but she'd already gone. She'd traveled 40 meters north, discovered a spot behind a rocky ledge, and waited for them to show themselves. When they did, her bullets reached them with machine-like accuracy. 20 minutes had passed since the attack started. 9 enemy shooters eliminated. 1 remained. The 10th was the most threatening. Carter could tell from his restraint. He hadn't fired in 5 minutes, hadn't shifted, hadn't revealed his location. He was waiting, patient, skilled, the kind of marksman who knew sometimes the best shot was the one you held until the ideal moment. But Carter had been that shooter once. She knew the thinking, the patience, the readiness to wait hours for one flawless shot, and she knew the flaw. Even the most patient marksman had to breathe, had to shift eventually, had to show some hint of their presence. She laid a trap. She positioned her pack in a spot looking like someone taking shelter, arranged her jacket to suggest a human shape. Then she relocated 50 meters away and waited with the same patience the enemy marksman showed. 15 minutes crawled by. The forest returned to its natural chorus, birds calling, wind through leaves, the distant rustle of tiny creatures. The seals stayed hidden, watching Carter operate, recognizing they were witnessing something remarkable. Then the 10th shooter took the bait. He fired at her fake target, a flawless shot that would have killed her if she'd actually been there. But she wasn't, and his muzzle flash revealed him. High northeast, 60 meters up in an oak, hidden in a spot so good she'd passed it twice without noticing. She fired one. The silenced round traveled 60 meters through dappled forest brightness, threaded between branches, and reached its mark with the accuracy of someone who'd executed this exact shot hundreds of times in terrain, just like this. The 10th shooter fell and the forest went silent. 23 minutes had passed since the attack began. 10 enemy shooters eliminated. 0 additional friendly losses beyond the opening contact. The death trap had been dismantled by someone who knew forest combat better than anyone Morrison had ever met. Carter descended from her spot and walked back to where the group was gathered, her rifle held with easy skill that spoke of thousands of practice hours. The SEALs stared at her like she'd stepped out of a myth. Positions neutralized, she reported, her voice maintaining that professional calm. But we need to leave. If they had a radio guy, backup could be coming. Morrison stepped forward, his face mixing amazement with frustration with bewilderment. Lieutenant Carter, you want to tell me what just happened? She met his look without hesitation. I did my assignment, Captain. Kept your team breathing so you could finish your mission. Your assignment is intelligence work, not, he gestured at the bodies spread through the forest canopy, whatever that was. That was professional woodland warfare at a level I didn't know existed. Sometimes job titles are adaptable, she said quietly, and sometimes people have abilities from earlier assignments that become helpful. Martinez, still pressing his wounded shoulder, spoke up. Ma'am, I've been operating for 12 years. I've collaborated with every special operations group we have. What I just watched you do, that's not something you pick up from a class. That's someone who's existed in forests like this, who's hunted and been hunted, who knows this place like they grew up in it. Carter stayed quiet for a beat. I used to operate in restricted environment, missions, forest specialty. 4 years in locations we weren't supposed to exist, doing activities that don't appear in files. I believed I was done with that world. Believed I could just study intelligence and write reports and never have to shoot again. But Morrison prompted. But watching your soldiers die in surroundings I grasped better than they do, she shook her head. I couldn't just observe. Not when I could change. Daniels, treating his wounded leg, expressed what everyone thought. You just rescued all our lives. Whatever you used to be, whatever you are today, I'm thankful you were present. Morrison studied her for a long pause, then reached a decision. The mission proceeds. We're 2 hours from objective. Carter, you're now leading with tactical command. Everyone clear. If these woods have more dangers, I want the person who knows it best showing the way. The group reorganized fast, treating injuries, sharing ammunition, adjusting to their new situation. The analyst they'd been safeguarding was now their strongest chance of survival. For the next 4 hours, Carter guided them through the forest like she possessed a map only she could read. She interpreted the land with reflexes, beyond any training, knowing which routes were secure, which zones to bypass, where enemy soldiers might have backup positions. She led them through the thickest sections of the forest, where watching from above was impossible, along hilltop lines offering both speed and concealment, through creek beds that covered their sounds and tracks. The weapons storage was precisely where intelligence reported, a hidden structure built into a hillside, surrounded by backup positions and guard stations. But Carter had already identified 3 guard spots that weren't on any intelligence document, using her grasp of forest warfare to predict where she'd position guards if this were her base. 6 guards visible, Morrison whispered, observing through his scope, probably more in 8 guards total. Carter corrected quietly. 2 more in hidden positions, northwest and southeast. And there's a sniper nest in that tall pine, 300 meters north. 1 shooter watching the pathways. Morrison looked where she pointed, and saw nothing but tree canopy. How can you possibly tell? Because that's where I'd position a sniper, and because I can spot the platform they constructed. Notice how those branches have been trimmed and positioned? Natural branches don't form that arrangement. She was correct. When Morrison examined closer with his enhanced optics, he could barely detect the artificial platform that Carter had noticed immediately. The team removed the guards with coordinated accuracy, Carter taking the sniper with a shot that wove through branches at 300 meters like the trees weren't there. They secured the storage facility, verified the presence of anti-aircraft rockets, and transmitted coordinates for the bombing run from a radio they recovered from the building. By the time they returned to the forward base 18 hours later, the tale had already started circulating. The intelligence worker who'd rescued an entire SEAL team by transforming into the most powerful forest fighter anyone had witnessed. The quiet soldier who'd changed into a phantom in the trees, tracking enemy shooters through land that should have made it unthinkable. In the debrief, Morrison was cautious with his phrasing. We faced hostile sniper locations in the forest. An attached specialist, Lieutenant Carter, turned out to have unique expertise in forest operations that proved essential to mission achievement. 10 enemy fighters were neutralized, minimal friendly losses, mission completed. But the battalion leader wasn't deceived. Colonel Hayes had been serving too long not to interpret hints. After the official debrief, he summoned Carter into his office privately. "Lieutenant," he said, reviewing her personnel record on his computer display, "your file has more blocked sections than I've ever witnessed. Your earlier assignments are classified at clearances I don't even possess, but after hearing Morrison's account and speaking with his team, I have a solid sense what you used to do." "Sir, I'm not cleared to. I'm not asking you to verify anything," Hayes cut in. "I'm just going to mention that we have more operations scheduled in this forest, risky operations, and I could genuinely use someone with your specific skills helping to organize them, someone who grasps what we're facing out there." Carter weighed this thoughtfully. She'd spent half a year trying to persuade herself she was finished with that existence, finished being a tool, finished being the person who resolved problems by being superior at combat than everyone else. But she'd also just experienced 23 minutes remembering what it felt like to be outstanding at something that counted, something that preserved lives. "I have requirements," she finally stated. Hayes smiled faintly. "I'm interested. I keep my analysis position as main duty, but for operations in forest settings where my background is useful, I'll offer tactical advice and join when needed on my conditions. Reasonable, and nobody needs to learn the specifics of my earlier work. My background stays protected, also reasonable." "Welcome to the group, Lieutenant." The actual group this time. Over the following year, Carter joined 15 operations in that forest. She organized them, directed them when required, and used her knowledge of the land to keep losses near zero. The SEALs who served with her developed an almost spiritual respect for her talents. The soldier who could interpret forests like others, read text, who traveled through canopies like others crossed floors, who could locate enemies that were invisible to everyone else. She never loved it. Every shot she made, every enemy she stopped, carried burden that kept her awake certain nights, but she'd accepted what she was, someone who could handle difficult tasks in dark locations, so that others could exist safely in brightness. The guardian protecting the vulnerable, the defender nobody wanted to consider but everyone required, and in the forests where light barely reached and threat hid in every shadow, that was exactly what created the gap between teams returning home, breathing, and families getting death messages. Lieutenant Lydia Carter had attempted to quit being a weapon. She'd discovered instead to be a weapon that picked carefully when and how to be deployed, and in a reality that sometimes needed someone who could track the trackers through impossible land. That wisdom rescued lives that would otherwise have been gone. 23 minutes, 10 enemy shooters, one soldier who remembered what she was when it counted most. The forest remembered, and the enemies who learned about the phantom in the canopy, the ones who lived to share the account, gave that forest wide space from then on, because some hunters you could notice approaching, but the most threatening ones were invisible until the instant they attacked, and by then, it was already finished. 3 months after that mission, Carter found herself in Colonel Hayes's office again. This time, Captain Morrison was present too, along with 2 officers she didn't know, both wearing civilian clothing that screamed intelligence agent. "Lieutenant Carter," Hayes started, "these individuals have an offer for you. They've been monitoring your performance." The older of the 2 civilians talked. "We represent a joint operation force that works in restricted settings globally. We've examined your record, the actual one, not the cleaned version. We'd like to offer you a role directing forest warfare instruction for special operations staff. You'd teach them what you understand, help them survive in settings like the one where you rescued Morrison's group." Carter thought about this. Teaching meant fewer triggers pressed, fewer faces in her sights, fewer nights lying awake, remembering the burden of choices made in split seconds. But it also meant her understanding could rescue lives she'd never encounter in locations she'd never visit. "I'll accept," she said, "but I have one requirement." "State it." "When groups I've trained enter the field, I accompany them as backup support, just in case." The civilian smiled. "We were expecting you'd request that." "Welcome on board, Lieutenant." Let's teach the coming generation how to master the forest instead of dying in it. And so Lydia Carter discovered her calling, not as a weapon, not as an analyst, but as both a guardian who could reason and shoot, instruct and perform, rescue lives through understanding, and when required, through carefully placed bullets that kept decent people breathing. The forest was her teaching space now, and her students learned from the finest, the Phantom, who turned a disaster into a legend in 23 minutes of perfect, terrible skill. She created a training course that became famous in Special Operations Group. Carter's Challenge, they named it. 3 weeks in thick forest learning to travel, conceal, track and survive in settings that had killed numerous operators before. Her students learned to interpret land, the way she did, to notice what forests tried hiding, to become part of the surroundings instead of battling against. But more critically, they learned the approach, the patience, the readiness to wait hours for the correct instant, the control to take only shots that mattered, the judgment to recognize when combat was required and when it wasn't. Morrison attended her first training session as a watcher. Seeing her teach, he finally grasped what made her exceptional. It wasn't just her abilities with a weapon or her capacity to travel through canopy. It was the manner she grasped the full picture: tactics, thinking, land, climate, enemy action patterns, and how everything connected in ways most people never noticed. She doesn't just teach shooting, he told Hayes later. She teaches people how to reason like the forest itself, how to transform into something that fits there instead of something that's invading it. That's why she's so powerful. Over the years, hundreds of operators completed Carter's course. Many of them lived because of lessons she'd taught: how to identify sniper positions that appeared like natural structures, how to travel through canopies without revealing your presence, how to interpret the forest's character, and adjust accordingly. And when her students encountered situations like the one that had nearly destroyed Morrison's team, they lived, they succeeded, because they'd learned from someone who'd conquered an environment most people would never comprehend. Lieutenant Lydia Carter never wanted praise, never desired medals or advancement, or public credit. She just wanted to keep decent people breathing in threatening locations. And in that quiet, unglamorous goal, she achieved beyond anyone's hope. The Phantom, in the canopy, the instructor in the forest, the weapon that picked carefully when to be deployed. 23 minutes had made her a legend, but the years that came after showed she was something more vital than legendary. She was essential. She created a training course that became famous in Special Operations Groups. Carter's Challenge, they named it. 3 weeks in thick forest learning to travel, conceal, track and survive in settings that had killed numerous operators before. Her students learned to interpret land, the way she did, to notice what forests tried hiding, to become part of the surroundings instead of battling against. But more critically, they learned the approach, the patience, the readiness to wait hours for the correct instant, the control to take only shots that mattered, the judgment to recognize when combat was required and when it wasn't. Morrison attended her first training session as a watcher. Seeing her teach, he finally grasped what made her exceptional. It wasn't just her abilities with a weapon or her capacity to travel through canopy. It was the manner she grasped the full picture: tactics, thinking, land, climate, enemy action patterns, and how everything connected in ways most people never noticed. She doesn't just teach shooting, he told Hayes later. She teaches people how to reason like the forest itself, how to transform into something that fits there instead of something that's invading it. That's why she's so powerful. Over the years, hundreds of operators completed Carter's course. Many of them lived because of lessons she'd taught: how to identify sniper positions that appeared like natural structures, how to travel through canopies without revealing your presence, how to interpret the forest's character, and adjust accordingly. And when her students encountered situations like the one that had nearly destroyed Morrison's team, they lived, they succeeded, because they'd learned from someone who'd conquered an environment most people would never comprehend. On a cool autumn morning, 5 years after that critical mission, Carter stood at the forest's border with her newest class of operators. They observed her with the same deep respect that Morrison's team had built, the honor born from knowing she could accomplish things they couldn't picture. The forest isn't your opponent, she told them, her voice holding the quiet command of someone who'd proven every word she spoke. It's your partner, if you understand how to hear it. Today you'll learn that language, and that language will rescue your life someday. She guided them into the canopy, and the forest absorbed them, like it had absorbed her so many times before. But this time, she was teaching others to survive in it, to control it, to become the hunters instead of the hunted. Lieutenant Lydia Carter never wanted praise, never desired medals or advancement, or public credit. She just wanted to keep decent people breathing in threatening locations, and in that quiet, unglamorous goal, she achieved beyond anyone's hope. The Phantom, in the canopy, the instructor, in the forest, the weapon that picked carefully when to be deployed. 23 minutes had made her a legend, but the years that came after showed she was something more vital than legendary. She was essential, and in a reality where forests still concealed threats and decent people still needed defending, that necessity would never disappear. The guardian protecting the vulnerable, forever alert, forever prepared, forever teaching the coming generation how to survive in darkness, where light barely reached and death waited in the branches overhead. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to hear more inspiring stories of courageous women in service.